Thank you, Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Tim Grosser.
Mr Speaker, I suppose that I'm now the first member of the House to follow and operationalise this new ruling, and I can assure you in the House that I will not be reading from a speech. But I will be referring to a document that I think will become quite important in New Zealand's economic history over the next few years, which is the National Government's 2011 National Economic Development Action Plan. Now, one of the things that I've found very amusing coming from the other side of politics has been, and I would say perhaps the word bemused rather than amused is a more appropriate word, is the accusation that National doesn't have a plan to fix New Zealand. Now, this is wrong on multiple levels, although one is rather interested in the implication that to fix the problem, or the problem that we're trying to fix, is the problem we inherited from 3 terms of the previous Labour government. But putting that aside, if you try and deconstruct the criticism and ask, well, what would constitute a, quote, plan? I mean, is it some sort of hairy-chested 1950s version of it with Commissar Cunliffe or Commissar Parker working long into the night with Leontief input-output tables, allocating resources in the so-called public interest? I don't suppose that is what they have in mind when they talk about a, quote, economic plan. So we'd have to assume that on the basis of it's better to listen...
Point of order, the Honourable
Mr Speaker, I draw your attention to the fact that members of this side of the House were referred to as commissars. I think that while the member himself has acknowledged once being a Stalinist, it's out of order in this House to call people on the opposite benches commissars.
I thank the member. I'll just ask the member to withdraw that comment.
It will be the last time that I will even use, obviously in jest, the word commissar.
The member has been... Order. The member has been asked to withdraw the comment. That's all a member is required to do, with no further comment. The Honourable Tim Grosser.
Yes, well, I withdraw and apologise. So, if that is not the concept of a, quote, economic plan, what would be the plan that Labour has in mind? Now, one would have to assume on the basis of the well-known principle that people should be judged by the actions they take rather than their words, that we could look at the 3 terms that the New Zealand public did give them the confidence of the Treasury benches to work out what a Labour plan to, quote, fix New Zealand would look like. So what would that really add up to? Well, fundamentally, the, quote, plan, unquote, that Labour unleashed on New Zealand after 3 years in the late 90s when growth averaged 4%, unemployment was rattling down and the deficit was coming down at the same time, resulted after 8 or 9 years in the following basic economic facts. First of all, the last 3 years of that government resulted in economic growth under 1%, finally achieving the remarkable distinction of putting New Zealand as the only developed country in the world to be in recession before the Lehman Brothers collapse provoked the global financial crisis. It was a, quote, economic plan, unquote, that gave us mortgage interest rates of over 10%, costing households on a typical average mortgage, Mr Speaker, $200 a week more than they're typically paying today on a structured mortgage of that nature. It was a plan that led us, as we discovered in question time today, to an explosion of private sector debt from around $70 billion in 1999 to around $177 billion by December 2008, causing a huge spike in New Zealand's net international liabilities, which, as the Minister for Economic Development has pointed out today, has come down very remarkably, considering how difficult it is to turn around a supertanker like that, from 85% of GDP to 69% of GDP, and it led to a tanking of productivity. So if that is the plan in their minds, could you please find another country to experiment on than ours? What we have given is a real plan which is working with New Zealanders and working with the market to try and fix some of the immediate macroeconomic imbalances facing New Zealand and make serious progress on long-term structural reform against the background of very difficult domestic conditions caused by the Canterbury earthquake, which is the second largest insurance disaster in the history of the planet, according to what I read, unbelievably. And secondly, the global financial crisis. And that's exactly, Mr. Speaker, what this government has done in the previous 3 years and will continue with this relentlessly over the next 3 years while we have the confidence of the Treasury benches. And it will address those serious structural imbalances. And yes, it will indeed try and lay the structural foundations for a brighter long-term outlook for our economy and for the people of New Zealand. First of all, we have addressed many of the structural economic imbalances, though I will be the first to admit there is a long way to go. We have stopped what was intended to be an endless parade of deficits and have got a plan that will have us just crossing the line into surplus by 2014-2015. We have initiated on the structural side very long overdue tax reform, which involved a very much needed shift on higher consumption tax.
Point of order, the Honourable David Cunliffe.
I'm loath to interrupt the member who's just returned to his seat, but I do seek the opportunity to table a copy of the Government's Economic Development Action Plan, noting that it contains no mention whatsoever of a return to surplus, or indeed any matter of...
Look, that's not a point of order. You're interrupting the member speaking, and we're going to hear the Minister out. If you wish us to table and seek leave after the Minister has spoken, that is a straight-out interruption of a member speaking.
Mr. Speaker, in addition to moving on the macroeconomic front, the economic plan which the member has just referred to advances a whole set of propositions under more than 30 different headings of structural reforms which piece by piece will create indeed the foundations for improved economic performance in this country. I mean, this is not the first time we've moved in this direction. If you look at our record in the previous government, one could pick many examples. I mean, one at random would be the work that we've done on aquaculture. After 8 or 9 years of not a single square metre of fresh open water space being allocated to what should be a far more vibrant export industry for New Zealand, finally we have advanced the frontier of reform in this area. Just one small example of the structural reforms that this national-led government has advanced and will intend to advance in the future. We have got the deficits under control, though we have some way to go, and it will be a very difficult task to continue to keep fiscal discipline into the point in which we have got restoration of New Zealand into a prudent situation. The one thing is very clear is that the era of beer and skittles is over. It is time now to get serious with public finances. There is any number of signals around the world telling New Zealanders, telling people of all nationalities that that's the nature of the game. This government is serious. This is a vital component of our economic plan for New Zealand. In addition to this, we have got a plan for advancing structural reform under many of those headings in that document. They cover numerous different issues, such as science and innovation, such as broadband and communications, rebuilding Canterbury, still a central preoccupation in terms of our economic plan for New Zealand, as it must be, given that it is the second largest city in New Zealand and absolutely central to our export effort. I want to give credit to the people of Canterbury for maintaining an astonishing performance in terms of getting their world-class goods and services out of the Port of Lyttelton, out of Christchurch Airport, under the most stressful conditions. I think they've just done an absolutely outstanding thing, and I think it's extraordinary when I listen to the people responsible for Lyttelton telling us that actually they're almost at record levels. But we have a whole series of economic plans which we will be implementing, Mr. Speaker, including trying to move our time limits on consenting medium-term projects, fresh water reform. We're going to try to address better the planning process around assessing natural hazards. And I predict, Mr. Speaker, that the Labour Party will oppose probably every single one of those reforms. This, by the way, Mr. Speaker, let me make it clear, is a prediction I would love to be proven wrong on. But I'm not counting on it. I'm not counting on it, Mr. Speaker. Fundamentally, to conclude, this is about advancing the frontier of a wealth creation economic plan for this country. And this is about trying to capture what I think is not just a necessity, but a mood shift that is there inside our community and inside communities around the world, as this process of financial deleveraging should be reaching every single responsible political party in this country. Because finally, to put it in the metaphor that our Prime Minister put it, we have indeed proven over the first 10 years of the 21st century that we can spend like a first world country. Now is the time, Mr. Speaker, to prove we can earn like one. Thank you.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr. Speaker, drawing upon Speaker's rulings 38, bar 2 and bar 3, I note that a member claiming to be misrepresented might seek an opportunity to explain that. The member who's just resumed his seat, sir, claimed that the Economic Development Action Plan of the government contained numerous fiscal targets, including a return to surplus. And when I attempted to
What is the point of order?
Well, the point is it does not, sir. It contains no targets.
Well, what is the member? So, what?
No, it's a separate point of order, separate point of comment.
Just, what's the point of order?
The first point of order is to explain that misrepresentation because this is not a fiscal plan. It contains no fiscal...
Order. That's a debating point. Order. Order. It's a debating point. If the member wishes to seek leave to table a document, he should do so.
I seek leave to table the government's Economic Development Action Plan, which contains no fiscal targets.
No, that's all you need to do. That's all you need to do. Order. That's only what you need to do. Leave aside for that purpose. Is there any objection? There is objection. The Honourable Phil Goff.
Mr. Speaker, the member who's just resumed his seat claimed to have a plan. Well, he and I attended in November a meeting of Business New Zealand where 2/3 of those present, New Zealand businessmen, said